Howdy, y'all. Today we're looking at the winners and losers for AOS 3 for Seraphon. So we don't know all the point values, so this could wildly change depending on what those point costs look like when they come out, which we should start seeing some leaks soon, I would imagine, but not yet. So we're going to look at overarching what subfactions look like they're going to be good in AOS 3. Starting off with my favorite, of course, Thunderlizards. Um, Thunderlizards here is going to be good, I think, because monster spam is now viable. The monsters now count as 5 models on objectives. That was one of the biggest downfalls of like a Steggys or something where you have a whole bunch of monsters but not a lot of units, is you could never capture objectives. And so now each of those monsters will be able to count as 5 models on objectives. That's huge. That means you can take most objectives with 1, 2, 3 monsters if you need to, if they're trying to hold it hard, and especially if you're slamming into them with those guys. You also don't care about unit coherency. You know all this nonsense about unit coherency? Last video we did showed a lot of the downfalls of that. Monsters don't care about unit coherency. Hey, that just makes this a lot easier. Also, one of the other rules that's in AOS 3 is pretty nice for these monsters, and that's pile into the closest unit instead of model. And so now if you slam into a unit and you want to pile around that unit, you can, and not just piling around a model. That really hurt monsters in the previous editions because you really couldn't get into the things that you wanted to sometimes if you got into combat with a specific model. Now you can pile around that entire unit with that monster. That's awesome. Also, monstrous rampages. This is a really cool ability where at the end of each charge phase, you get to pick up to 4 monsters and apply a buff to them. Now, you have to spread it around, and some are better than others, but this gives you a nice little buff for those monster units in your Thunderlizards. Also, heroic actions. At the start of each hero phase, you pick one heroic action for a hero to apply that. And these, they can add +1 to hit. They can do a variety of different things. Shut off command abilities. Heals, and so there's some really cool stuff that you can do. So along with our Thunderlizard, Stegadon chief, he's might be getting the sacred asterisms to give him extra attacks. You might give him a monstrous rampage. You might give him a heroic action. All of a sudden, you're able to buff up this guy quite a bit higher than maybe not quite as high as we could previously in like Thunderquake, but not bad at all. And we also have, this is also a great subfaction now for Stegadons, which it always has been, but also for Carnosaurs. I think Carnosaurs have gotten hit a little bit based on their command abilities. We'll talk about that here in a minute. And you'd see them mostly in Koatl's Claw, but I think you're going to see some Carnosaurs in Thunderlizards. And I think they're quite viable in Thunderlizards as a big hero here. So thumbs up on Thunderlizards. I think they have gotten better in this edition. One thing that I didn't want to include this in that same Stegageddon category, but Bastiladons are actually kind of taking a hit. So they do go on Thunderlizards a lot. That's where they would really get the most punch. And I think in Thunderlizards, Bastiladons aren't quite as good now. I'm gonna put this as a sideways arrow because I think they still have a place. They're not like unusable. But they did take a hit. So Bastiladons, I probably won't be taking more than one in a list now because in Thunderlizard, you can't double fire more than one Bastiladon or an Engine of God per shooting phase. And so there's a new rule that says only one hero or only a hero can only use one command ability per phase, and a unit can only accept that one command ability per phase, and you can't use the same one more than once. And so that applies to our Thunderlizard command ability, and that normally you would take one hero and pass that same ability around to the engine, the 2 Bastiladons if you had 2 or more. Now you're only going to be able to use that command ability once per shooting phase for one Bastiladon or one Engine of God. So pretty big nerf there. That kind of hurts, especially my dual Bastiladon list. Also, the +1 save on the Bastiladon can now be rended. And so this one kind of hurts the Bastiladon a little bit. Previously, no matter how much rend you had into the Bastiladon, he could only be hurt on a 1 until you put enough wounds through. But now there's no rule that says a save can't be modified below 1. That was the previous rule. So now a save can be modified below 1, which basically just means a Bastiladon will always take rend as normal. Probably for the good, but it does make him a lot less durable. Mystic Shield is also now +1 to save instead of reroll 1s, which that was a favorite combo, was a Bastiladon who could only fail on 1 with the reroll 1s. So that's kind of gone. So Bastiladon is a little bit easier to kill. He still starts on a 1-up save, so he is still very difficult to kill, but you'll probably only be seeing one of these guys now. Also, Thunderquake Battalion. Oh, man. Yeah. Rest in peace, my sweet battalion. This was my favorite battalion in the previous book. It was my favorite battalion in this book. And now all those War Scroll battalions are gone. And so this one's gone. This battalion really pumped up our Stegadons and our Kroxigor and Salamanders. And so that one will be gone now too. Speaking of Kroxigor, they're really going to miss that battalion. And because of the unit coherency, I think they're more of an MSU unit now. So you might see units of 3 of those on the battlefield instead of a big unit of 6 so that they don't get in trouble with coherency. They're only 6 models. Their weapon does have a 2-inch range, so they can hit over the top, so it's not too bad. But this edition of Age of Sigmar, you're going to see an increase in MSU units. All right, let's go on to Draco Tail. I think they're slightly down, maybe sideways if we're being generous. I think it's still a very usable subfaction, but a couple things did hurt it. So it's changed to Cogs, hurts a lot in that Cogs will only give you +1 to your charge now instead of +2, and it's only within 18 of the Cogs instead of board wide. Now, we haven't seen the War Scrolls for all the bound endless spells. I'm assuming those might get changed in the FAQs that drop after AOS, but I'm assuming it's going to follow along with the same endless spell updates. So the change of Cogs hurts because in Draco Tail you would use Cogs most of the time so that you would have +2 to charge for all your units that are dropping down, and you would usually turn the asterisms over to +1 to charge, so you'd have +3 to charge, get most of those charges in. If you failed any of those, you would just re-roll it. Well, now you can only use a re-roll charge command ability once in the charge phase. And so that one kind of hurts too, because this faction is all about dropping stuff down and getting into the enemy and hitting hard there in melee. The Unleash Hell command ability, which is basically Overwatch, is going to really hurt this subfaction, I think, because you are dropping down in, you're charging in. Once you make those charges, they're going to be shooting you with a lot of stuff. And so I think you'll see, well, of course, they only get to use it once, but it's going to hurt one of your units, I guess. And so that can really hurt this battalion because it is very specific in its goal and playstyle on the table. Croak point increase, so that does hurt the subfaction a little bit, but I think he's still good. He's still a command point generating machine, and I think he's still going to be used in just about all the Draco Tail lists. Usually you have a Croak and a Slann, and then a bunch of monsters, and you're bringing those guys in and slamming into melee with those. I do think it's very playable. As I said, you still got your Slann, teleport Croak up, bring in a bunch of big, hard-hitting stuff, and hit into them. So I think you can still combo some good stuff here in Draco Tail, but those charges are going to be a little bit harder now without Cogs, and so keep that in mind on what you're deep striking. Here's one, Fangs of Sotek. I do think Fangs of Sotek got worse. Now, many people would say this is a welcomed change. We'll see if it did enough to make Fangs of Sotek not the headache that everyone has to deal with. And I think a lot of this is dependent on what they do with Skinks. If they keep Skinks at 10 models per unit, then we're going to have a significant hurt here to Fangs of Sotek. So the way they're doing hordes now, if you haven't heard, every unit's taken at its minimum, and then you can reinforce it with an extra set of that unit. So a unit of Skinks could go from 10 to 20 to 30, but that's it. And you would have to use 2 of your reinforcement points for that. And you only get 4, which means you can only have 2 max units of Skinks at 30 each. And so this hurts. Most of the time I would be looking to take at least 140. And so you're losing 20 shots out of that unit of Skinks. If you normally ran 2 units of 40, which I did a lot, you're losing 20 shots from each of those units, and so your damage output's going down quite a bit. And you can also only stack 1 command point per phase on those skinks. These skinks only they're terrible without all their support. And so we'll be doing a video later on what phases, when to stack, where to stack, what to stack on all these different units. That's a complicated one, but we'll get to that one. And it'll show some of these units get hurt by not being able to put multiple things on them in each turn. Also, their max of +1 to save can hurt in some cases. So if you take the shields, which just about everybody took the shields on those, you get a native +1 to their save. Now, it's not to their save characteristics, it is to the save roll. And so a lot of times we'd add another +1 from the Skink Priest. Now that's wasted in some cases, depending on what's attacking you, how much Rin they have. But there are going to be cases where that extra +1 to save doesn't do you any good. We've also sometimes put another +1 to save on them from the Starseer, and there's going to be a lot of cases where that's wasted as well. So not as much output, not quite as tough. The Skinks, we'll see what their cost is and what the minimum unit size is for those Skinks once points drop. Salamanders, they're likely a single unit now. We'll have to wait and see what the points do to them. But even if they aren't, you're unlikely to spend your reinforcement points to bring Salamanders up to a 2 unit or a 3 unit. And well, actually, you could only bring them up to a 2 model unit because they're not battle line. So you're unlikely to spend your reinforcement points on them. So you're probably going to be running Salamanders in single units, which means you can't teleport 3 of them into someplace and target strike something. So I think your output from the Salamanders is going to be less. They're going to be an easier target to take down. They'll still be fast in Fangs of Sotek, and I think you can still kill stuff, but they're not quite as useful. Chameleon Skinks, one of my favorites, are back to MSU, basically. So they're not battle line, so you could only upgrade them once if you used a reinforcement point, from 5 models to 10. So I think that they're going to be back to that MSU-style play. You're going to run them in 5s. You're going to be dropping down a couple here and there just to harass and score objectives, but they're so weak. In those small units, you can't fire them because you're probably going to be using that command point for Fangs of Sotek from another unit that's worth more, and so these guys may not see as much play. Also, their 3-up cover save is kind of wasting because you can only add 1 to save unless something's attacking them with -2 rend. Then your most of that save is kind of wasted. I think Croak and the loss of Balewind really hurts Fangs of Sotek. So that's where you would normally see the Croak up on Balewind Vortex. And that is gone now. Balewind Vortex is gone. And so Croak won't have as much damage output. He's still very useful. You're gonna get a lot of command points. But that's raising the cost of the army and not as much output. That's kind of the the theme here is our output in Fangs of Sotek isn't nearly as much as it used to be. The Unleash Hell command ability, which is an Overwatch, is very strong, and I think that is going to be really good here in Fangs of Sotek because you can only spend 1 command point to shoot and retreat 1 unit of Skinks. You could use another command point on Unleash Hell to shoot a different unit, and so you can still combo up to where you get both of your max units of Skinks firing as that reaction shot. And so I think that's probably the saving grace of Fangs of Sotek. Now it's less damage output, but there still is a way to get both of those hordes shooting despite that max 1 command point per turn use. So I think Fangs of Sotek will still be playable, so don't throw all your Skinks away. Not quite as good as it used to be, but I think there is still a good army there. So it's down, but it's not gone. The sad one coming up next is Koatl's Claw. Now, I gave this 2 down arrows because already Koatl's Claw, there were some lists that worked, but it was never going to win, tournaments and stuff like that. If it was very hard to do so. But it's gotten a lot of bad nerfs here in this edition. Starting off, Carnosaurs can no longer stack command abilities. That's where you could really get like a Scar veteran on Old Blood to just like completely go off and explode. He could stack his command ability on top of the command ability for Koatl's Claw, plus his weapon, plus reroll ones. I mean, you could get this guy up to doing really good. But now we've lost that reroll ones to hit. Now that all out attack is just +1 to hit, which he's already going to have native if he charged, and then you're only going to be able to recycle 1 command point per phase because he can only spend 1 command point per phase. So the Carnosaur used to be able to use these command abilities and just kind of recycle and just keep spending command points until you'd pump him up and he would just destroy things. That's no longer going to be possible because he can only use 1 command point per turn, or per phase. Also, the artifact is wasted. It can only trigger on hits of 6, and in the rules it says if there are 2 abilities that trigger both on the same roll, you have to choose one of them. And so previously we could explode his weapon. We could also explode from his bites, and then his weapon exploded on 6s to do mortal wounds. And so that was where you could kind of pump this guy up. And now you're going to have to choose one of those abilities to go off. And so the Carnosaur's output have gone down quite a bit, especially in Koatl's Claw, where you could stack some of those things. In Koatl's Claw, the +1 to hit faction command ability is kind of wasted. That was if you charged, you got +1, but if you didn't charge, you could just give them +1 to their hits. Well, now you can do that anyway with a generic command point. And so that faction-specific command ability is kind of wasted. It's easy to get +1 to hit with generic command ability, and faction ability is still useful, +1 to hit on charge. I think that's the one saving grace of Koatl's Claw, is that you can still get that +1 to hit for free when you charge. Unfortunately, all the units you like to take in Koatl's Claw are not very good anymore. So the warrior hordes are worse than before. So they lost their battalion for extra rend. That was one of the good things, was being able to take the spears and give them rend, or take the swords or the clubs and give them -2 rend in that battalion. Now that battalion's gone, since we can't take War Scroll battalions, so their damage output has gone down quite a bit. Also, unit coherency rules really hurt these warriors because they're on the 32mm base, and so you can finagle it a little bit, but you're going to be fighting usually in ranks with these guys just to speed things up. And so that means you're really going to want to take spears so they can fight on the second row. That will help a little bit, but it's going to be a lot harder to play with these warriors. Knights, the Source Knights, they also lost their battalion. So they had their one nice trick was that they had that +3 to charge from the battalion. And they're so slow for cavalry that they needed those extra pluses to their charge. So like Cogs, Starseer, and +3, and you could actually move these guys across the board. But now they've lost that battalion, which was that +3 to charge, and it's going to be a lot harder to get them into combat. Cogs goes down to just +1, harder to get them in combat. Also, these knights come in units of 5 and 10, and so it's going to be harder to keep those coherencies in a unit of 10. You do kind of have to line some up on the back line. Not too many, thankfully, but it is hard to keep that coherency when you're trying to get pile-ins to things that you want. So I think you're going to see Source Warriors best as MSU because they have a big footprint in a unit of 5. You can turn them sideways. You can take up quite a bit of board space. I'm looking at running Knights, not in Koatl's Claw, but in MSU minimum units in probably things like Thunderlizards. So where I have a couple extra bodies, I have some screens to protect the monsters. I might see my Knights played more there than I had in Koatl's Claw. So I think Koatl's Claw takes a big hit in this edition. Just kind of took away a lot of its tricks that it had. So conclusion for Subfactions. I think a lot of this still hinges on the points in the FAQs that will have a big impact on this. If points really hit some of these things hard, we may have to look elsewhere. If they really give us a points decrease on things, which I don't know that much of that's going to happen. I think a lot of points are going up in AOS 3 to kind of reduce the amount of unit spam that we have on the board. And so I would expect to see all of our points raised up a little bit. I do think we're going to see the rise of Monster Mash. I think Steggadons are going to see more play, depending on points, of course. But I'm excited about that. Obviously, you all know I have a ton of Steggadons, and so that's my favorite list, is a bunch of Steggadons. I will be playing that. So that should be a lot of fun, especially being able to cap objectives with 5 models per Stegadon. That's gonna be beautiful. Poor Saurus Warriors, even worse than before. Um, I love to summon in Saurus Warriors for my Engine of the Gods in Thunderlizards. I have a feeling that's not going to happen very often now with the command point nerf, and then the Saurus Warriors aren't really a great screen anymore. And so, man, poor Saurus Warriors. One day, GW will love you again. One day. Source Knights, I think you're going to see them more as MSU. They're still playable in a big unit, I think, but a lot harder. And I think they're one of our better MSU units now, especially if you're not in the Skinks side of the house. Fangs of Sotek, I think, is still very playable. I don't think it's going to be the S tier list anymore with a lot of damage reduction and things hitting our main units that we want to do. But I think Fangs of Sotek is still very playable. I think you'll see it. Dracothian's Tail, I think, will still mysteriously win events. You see every once in a while you see a Dracothian's Tail pop up, a list pop up, and win an event. And I always look at the list and I go, okay, I know what they're doing, but every time I try that, I cannot win. So that's the Dracothian's Tails for the sophisticated player, not us Stegageddon players who just like to rush forward. Anyway, I think we're still in a good place. I think we still have some good lists. And Stegageddon, get at it, boys! All right, let me know what y'all think. What's a winner and loser for our sub factions, and I'll catch you guys next time. See you.